SLT Mobitel Fiber. දේශයේ ෆයිබර් බලවේගය. SLT Mobitel Fiber. දේශයේ ෆයිබර් බලවේගය.
රින් වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට රුපියල් 180යි.
Tonight, walk the talk. President Gotabaya calls for developed countries to step up and fulfill their commitments.
Developing countries need meaningful multilateral and bilateral support to implement climate change mitigation. This will create new opportunities for green growth.
Slow and steady. Economists advise the government to approach budget tax revisions with care.
Immediate changes to the corporate income tax rates might create some negative or disruptive impacts on the incentive for investment and consumption. But again, going forward, if you look at Sri Lanka's regular tax rate of 24% for corporate income taxes, that is pretty much in line with the median range.
Chinese standoff. The National Plant Quarantine Service hits back at Chinese fertilizer companies, testing accuracy allegations, saying it knows what it's doing. Drawing flack. The appointment of a controversial Buddhist monk to head the One Country One Law Presidential Task Force attracts opposition ire.
President has vested his executive powers to a presidential task force which is headed by a person who is known to have violated the constitution of Sri Lanka.
All this and much more coming up on this Wednesday, the 27th of October 2021.
වීව එකතුණු උකුතේ එකක
රස උපරිමයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I am Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has called on developed countries to step up to the plate and assist less developed countries to achieve their goals of being more climate resistant. The head of state made this clarion call at a high-level meeting themed Delivering Climate Action for People, Planet and Prosperity during the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly today.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa participated in a high-level meeting themed Delivering Climate Action for People, Planet and Prosperity, convened by Abdullah Shahid, the president of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly today. During his video address, the president urged developed countries to do their bit to help developing countries better prepare themselves to mitigate climate change threats.
We are at a critical time in human history. As such, climate change needs to be addressed urgently and decisively. As a developing tropical island nation, Sri Lanka is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. We have ensured that Sri Lanka's domestic policy framework has a focus on sustainability. To give effect to this, we are taking steps to limit overuse of artificial fertilizers, thereby addressing health concerns as well as helping reduce nitrogen waste. Our nationally determined contributions targets achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. On the energy side, we aim to increase the contribution of renewable energy sources to 70% of national energy needs by 2030. We are also working towards enhancing national forest cover. To achieve these laudable objectives, Sri Lanka welcomes assistance through technology transfers, skills development, investment and financing support for our sustainable development agenda. We reiterate that developed nations must fulfill their commitments to help the planet heal. Developing countries need meaningful multilateral and bilateral support to implement climate change mitigation and adaptation activities. This will create new opportunities for green growth that enhances future prosperity. The time to act is now.
The opening plenary sessions of the Making Global Goals Local Business Program was held yesterday, with speakers elaborating on how sustainable businesses can bring about solutions to the challenges the world is faced with, as well as to accelerate action to achieve sustainable development goals. During the virtual conference, UNDP resident representative of Sri Lanka, Robert Jukum, called for the governments to encourage businesses to take risks while calling on the private sector to support governments in bridging the SDG financing gap. A United Nations webinar on making global goals local business, hosted by the Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, commenced virtually yesterday. This is part of UN Global Compact's 5-year campaign to bring together a global movement of sustainable companies and stakeholders to take decisive actions to make the world a better place.
Due to the size of its economy and the opportunities, Sri Lanka has the potential to drive advancements in sustainable development at a regional and global scale. The country plays a critical role in making global goals a reality. I would like to highlight a few key features of the UN Global Compact's new strategy that I think will help drive further success in Sri Lanka. The first centers around balanced growth of our local and regional networks, which speaks to the UN Global Compact's plans to expand its reach to an additional 20 to 25 countries over the next 3 years. Beyond this geographic expansion, we also plan to increase our participation among business partners beyond the more than 13,000 companies that have already joined the initiative. The second strategic shift is for stronger, more active engagement with our UN partners, especially at the local level. Our third shift in our new strategy calls for harnessing the collective power of small and medium-sized enterprises. We're developing a number of initiatives and projects specifically with SMEs in mind, and I look forward to welcoming Sri Lankan businesses into the UN Global Compact to address our 10 universal principles on human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. Our fourth strategic shift focuses on specific, measurable targets with an enhanced reporting framework, one that holds participating companies accountable on the progress that they are making. Final and perhaps most important shift in strategy, which is driving and measuring impact across our 10 principles and priority SDG areas. Priorities that are important and relevant to this discussion, and where business has a crucial role to play.
Also speaking at the virtual conference, Chairman of the UN Global Compact Sri Lanka, Tilhan Fernando, called for a fundamentally different approach in order to address the problems faced today, which he says is global in nature.
We see a fundamental shift in markets because consumers are demanding on sustainability in a wider sense, whether it is gender, whether it is social, or whether environmental compliance. In fact, it is about conserving our resources because ultimately biodiversity, the ecosystem services that biodiversity offers, they are the building blocks for what comes next. Businesses often think of sustainability as a cost, but that's because we have been living an 18th century definition, and therefore in being unsustainable, any business is being parasitic upon its environment and upon the community in which it operates. Please remember that whether the people that we are seeking to protect from poverty or injustice, or whether the planet that we are seeking to protect and nurture, it is about building for the future. It is about finding a new paradigm that takes our resources, our environment into consideration in building for the future.
PPPs have potential to exploit synergies through joint innovative use of resources and in the application of management knowledge with a kind of optimal attainment of the goals of all parties involved, and most importantly, the citizen. In a post-pandemic and climate vulnerable world, there's a need to really visualize this synergy, to do it in a way that's balanced. Governments should support a coherent policy environment for businesses, make de-risking of private investments possible, encourage businesses to take risks, and provide strong tax and legislative foundations to drive PPPs, all the while protecting public interest and environmental assets. Private sector can and should ensure that market systems work for SDGs. Private sector should and can bolster green entrepreneurship and sustainable value chain, and can support governments to mobilize innovative financing tools and mobilize private equity to bridge the SDG financing gap.
In the lead up to the budget 2022, the government is being urged to tread carefully when revising corporate taxes, as doing so without care may risk alienating the country's production ecosystem and possible future investments as well. This was stated by Verity Research Director Deshal Dimel during a special budget-themed webinar held today.
Speaking at a webinar in the run-up to the country's next budget, Research Director at Verite Research, Deshal Dimel, says that revenue enhancement measures such as tax increases will be critical. However, they will need to be carefully calibrated to ensure no additional pressures are placed on production and investment attractiveness.
I would think the best way to address that is to focus on measures that improve the tax base and less so in terms of increasing rates, at least in the short term. And one way that we could look at this is to look at it progressively over a 3-year period, where in the immediate instance, so from January 2022 or even immediately with the budget, you could look at reducing the thresholds of, say, VAT. So VAT, the threshold was increased from 12 million rupees to 300 million rupees per annum. So that can be reduced even in the first year, even down from 300 million to 150 million. Likewise for personal income taxes as well. There also in the first year itself, you could reduce the threshold that was increased quite significantly to around 3 million rupees per annum. That can also be reduced back down to a lower level, and that can result in an improved tax base without necessarily increasing the tax rates.
In addition, Dimel also suggested that the government look at the possibility of introducing indexation of alcohol and tobacco taxation, given the fact that the state lost 20 billion rupees in a single year due to its non-implementation.
Another measure that can be introduced in the short term is for indexation of alcohol and tobacco taxation. So Verite has done a study that demonstrated that in just 1 year, by failing to implement indexation of tobacco taxes, the opportunity lost in terms of tax revenue was around 20 billion Sri Lankan rupees.
Dimel also showed that it may be possible to raise VAT rates by 2023 or 2024, as the economy would have had sufficient time to recover to some extent by then.
By 2023, 2024, the rates of VAT can also be further enhanced, particularly because by then the economic recovery would have had a better hold and the momentum would have set in. So Sri Lanka's current VAT rate is 8%. That is very low by our regional peer comparisons and also low by Sri Lanka's historical standards as well.
Dimel also showed that currently Sri Lanka's corporate income tax system has a lot of concessionary rates, which he says should look to revert back to a 3-tier rate by about 2023.
Immediate changes to the corporate income tax rates might create some negative or disruptive impacts on the incentive for investment and consumption. But again, going forward, if you look at Sri Lanka's regular tax rate of 24% for corporate income taxes, that is pretty much in line with the median range for our peer economies as well. So really, Sri Lanka's issue on corporate taxes is more to do with the significant level of divergences that we have from the regular rate. So we have a lot of concessionary tax rates. One suggestion is that by, say, January 2023, we could shift to a system where you revert to a 3-tier corporate income tax rate of 24% as your regular rate, 14% as your concessionary rate, and 40% as your top rate that is applicable to sectors such as alcohol, tobacco, and gaming. There will be a critical element in terms of the upcoming 2022 budget. But at the same time, we are all aware that the Sri Lankan economy is still kind of recovering from the pandemic-related stresses. So any revenue enhancement measures, particularly through taxation, needs to be quite carefully calibrated so that it doesn't create disincentives against the production process and new investments, consumption, and so on.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today appointed a 13-member presidential task force headed by Venerable Galagudatte Gnanasara Thera to implement the concept of one country, one law and prepare a draft. The appointment of the task force, particularly Venerable Gnanasara Thera, has drawn heavy criticism from the opposition, with Ilangai Tamilarsa Katchi parliamentarian Shanakyan Rasamanikam calling the Thera the most unfit to head the task force, given his record of violations and hatred towards minorities. Via an extraordinary Gazette notification, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has appointed a 13-member presidential task force to implement the concept of one law, one country. The task force shoulders the responsibility of preparing a draft after a thorough study of the implementation of the concept one country, one law within Sri Lanka. The task force is also tasked with studying the draft acts and amendments already prepared in this regard by the Ministry of Justice, as well as their appropriateness, and to make suitable amendments if necessary and include them in the draft. Furthermore, the task force is instructed to submit a monthly report to the President on the relevant draft and to submit the final report on or before the 22nd of February 2022. Led by Venerable Galagudatte Gnanasara Thera, the task force also consists of Professor Dayananda Banda, Professor Satinanda Vijay Singha, Professor Sumedha Sirivardhana, N.G. Sujeeva Pandita Ratna, Attorney at Law Iresh Senaviratna, Attorney at Law Sanjay Marambe, Iranda Navaratna, Pani Vavala, Maulavi Mohammed, Lecturer Mohammed Intikhab, Khalil Rahman and Aziz Nizardeen. The appointment of Venerable Galagudatte Gnanasara Thera to lead the task force, however, has drawn heavy criticism from the opposition.
It is in fact very unfortunate that a person such as Galagodathe Nyanasara has been appointed as the head of a task force to ensure that there is one country and one law in this country. President has vested his executive powers to a presidential task force which is headed by a person who is known to have violated the constitution of Sri Lanka, who is known to spread hatred and violence against minorities in this country. So where is this country heading to today? As Sri Lankans, we should all be concerned because in the next few years we are going to face a massive food crisis in this country. We are already facing a massive economic crisis. Our banking sectors are going to collapse very soon. So at this point, President has appointed such a task force disrespecting all democratic processes, and also it's important that we note that there are no Tamil speaking people, no Hindus especially in this committee that has been appointed also. So what we ask the president to do is that to enact the law that is already in place in the country. One country, one law. The expectation of the fact that one country, one law is the fact that whatever law that is in place be used in proportion amongst all civilians. Whereas today the law is used in double standards. There's different measures that the law is used upon different people. In Batik law, civilians are brutally attacked by the police. Whereas in Colombo, people who have committed large crimes are still out at large. So what we want for the president to do is enact the law equally to everybody. We don't need a new commission to give him recommendations. Then the president should resign and go home. If he needs a commission to tell him how one country, one law needs to be enacted, then I think he's unfit for this job.
Big 3.
The head of National Plant Quarantine Service, Dr. Tushara Wickremarachi, rejected allegations levelled by the Chinese company behind the controversial tainted organic fertilizer of low standards in their testing of samples. Dr. Wickremarachi says that he is supremely confident in his laboratory's abilities, which runs according to standards of the International Plant Protection Convention and is approved by over 180 countries. Further, Dr. Wickremarachi said that NPQS will not entertain any third-party report requested by the Chinese company. China's Qingdao Siemens Biotech Limited, the company embroiled in the organic fertilizer import controversy, issued a media communique yesterday challenging the test results of Sri Lanka's National Plant Quarantine Service and outlining what it terms the truth and facts about its organic fertilizer. In the communique, the company claims that the National Plant Quarantine Service had not shared the test report, its test methodology and the standards that its laboratory adheres to with them. It also claims that despite it requiring 6 days for Erwinia to be detected in samples, according to Rule 27 of the International Plant Protection Convention, the NPQS had only taken 3 days to conclude that the samples contained the bacteria. The company also alleged that the NPQS had tested the samples for Erwinia at the wrong temperature of 37 degrees instead of 25 degrees, according to the International Plant Protection Convention. What's more, the statement alleged that it takes at least 13 to 14 days to confirm Erwinia through testing. Qingdao Siemens Biotech also says that its samples had passed tests carried out by the Scudder Group, a third-party international testing organization designated by the Sri Lanka Standards Institute and Chinese Customs Export Plant Quarantine Department before shipment on the 23rd of September. The company also alleged that the NPQS had ignored these test results and instead stuck to their own reports as the basis for judging the quality of the fertilizer. In conclusion, the company has called for further testing to be carried out by the Swiss SGS Group, which is considered a global authority for such tests. The company also says that it is prepared to transport the fertilizer at its own cost back to China if the tests come back positive for Erwinia. However, if not, they would expect the Sri Lankan government to accept and pay for the goods. However, speaking to First at 9 today, Additional Director of the National Plant Quarantine Service, Dr. Tushara Wickremarachi, rejected the company's claims, saying that the NPQS stands firm by its testing processes. Dr. Wickremarachi explained that the National Plant Quarantine Service's laboratory standards are accepted by over 180 countries and adhere to standards set out by the International Plant Protection Convention. He added that the NPQS is not prepared to accept any third-party tests demanded by the Chinese company. Meanwhile, addressing a media briefing today, Minister of Agriculture Mahindananda Alutgamage assured the public that the government's stance is that this particular shipment will not be allowed to dock in Sri Lanka. He adds, however, that the government is prepared to accept any future shipments as long as the samples pass third-party and local testing regimens. The Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts was informed by the Commissioner General of Excise that the hit to government coffers from low excise revenue during the pandemic has a whopping 27 billion rupees this year. The committee was also told that the Excise Department's 160 billion rupee target this year may be hard to achieve under the current circumstances. The Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts has been informed earlier this week that the government lost 27 billion rupees in excise revenue this year due to the current COVID situation. Appearing before the committee last week, Commissioner General of Excise M.J. Gunasiri revealed that although the expected revenue of the Excise Department this year is 160 billion rupees, it may be difficult to achieve it in the current situation. Further, despite the Excise Department, the Customs Department and the Inland Revenue Department having made recommendations at a COPA meeting in 2019 for the setting up of an interconnected computer system, it was revealed that this was yet to be implemented despite allocation made in the budgets and supplements for the year 2016 to 2018. The committee directed the Commissioner General of Excise to submit to the COPA committee the time frame for the installation of the computer system with a defined plan before the 5th of November. In addition, delays in the use of safety sticker for liquid bottles and liquor-related products and the delay in the development of a secure sticker management system were also discussed at this meeting, with excise officials saying that the process had been delayed due to slow implementation of digital technology by major manufacturing companies. With the country about to fully reopen for tourists ahead of the upcoming high season, new guidelines for inbound travellers were released by the Director General of Health Services. As per the new guidelines, travellers who were infected with COVID-19 3 months prior to arrival will now only require a negative rapid antigen test result done within 48 hours before embarkation instead of a PCR test. As per the latest guidelines issued by Director General of Health Services Dr. Asela Gunawardena relating to inbound travellers to Sri Lanka, travellers with a history of COVID-19 infection during the past 6 months and having received a single vaccine dose 2 weeks after recovery can disembark with a negative PCR test report done within 72 hours of embarkation. Further, kids below 18 years too could enter with a negative PCR test. However, travellers infected with COVID-19 within the last 3 months will require a negative rapid antigen test report done 48 hours prior to embarkation. Such travellers will also require either a COVID-19 diagnosis card or a positive PCR or antigen result as a proof of past history of illness in English. For vaccinated travellers, it is a must to carry their vaccination cards with the original as well as its English translation. Fully vaccinated travellers arriving after 14 days of their second dose with a negative PCR test or antigen test can exit the airport and will not need quarantine or on-arrival PCR tests. Further, unvaccinated children below 12 years of age with vaccinated parents who are Sri Lankan citizens, dual citizens or resident visa holders will be allowed to travel with their parents. However, unvaccinated children between 12 to 18 will need to undergo a day 1 PCR test at an approved laboratory or an approved quarantine hotel. After this, they will be allowed to go home if the test result is negative. Further, the same guidelines are applicable for unvaccinated children below 12 years as well as those between 12 to 18 years with fully vaccinated foreign parents. Meanwhile, any Sri Lankan dual citizen or resident visa holder who hasn't completed their vaccinations will need to undergo a PCR test at a quarantine hotel or an approved lab. If the day 1 result is negative, they will be expected to undergo home quarantine and will be released from quarantine following the exit PCR or rapid antigen test on day 7. Unvaccinated tourists, however, must undergo quarantine for 7 days at a hotel and will be released following a negative PCR or rapid antigen test on day 7. More details on guidelines can be obtained from the Ministry of Health website www.health.gov.lk. Shamila Rajapaksa has been appointed as the new Director General of the Department of National Zoological Gardens. Her appointment fills the vacant position left following the resignation of Ishini Vikramasinghe, who was the former Director General of the department. According to the media communique issued by the department, Rajapaksa is scheduled to assume duties tomorrow. She has previously served as the head of social media at the Presidential Secretariat. Rajapaksa is an alumnus of the Universities of Sri Jayawardhanapura and Colombo Colombo, where she obtained her bachelor's and master's degrees respectively. Further, she is an accountant by profession. Welcome back in business news. The central bank says that it expects several advances from finalized development project deals with foreign companies in the coming months that will show up the country's current balance. These include the West Container Terminal deal, the West Coast Power Plant deal, and 2 other property deals worth $200 million.
The central bank yesterday issued a communique outlining progress in securing foreign exchange inflows through direct engagement with other governments, central banks, financial institutions and investors, as announced in its 6-month roadmap for ensuring macroeconomic and financial system stability. The communique stated that several MOUs have been entered into in relation to development projects in line with monetization of underutilized or non-strategic assets, including expected proceeds from 2 transactions, namely Chalmers Granaries and a property behind One Golf Ace, which are expected to fetch $200 million with an advance payment expected shortly. It also announced the finalization of the $650 million West Container Terminal deal with the Adani Group, John Keells Holdings and the Sri Lanka Ports Authority. The central bank also announced the receipt of the first tranche of the $250 million West Coast Power Plant deal with New Fortress Energy in the November to December period. The bank also revealed that negotiations are underway to expedite the finalization of foreign currency swap arrangements with neighboring central banks, specifically the Reserve Bank of India, the People's Bank of China and several Middle Eastern central banks. Further, the government is processing a $1.5 billion long-term loan offer from a foreign government-affiliated agency, it added. Further, syndicated loan arrangements negotiated by the government have attracted several proposals so far, which the central bank says it is currently processing.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.